we read about the dreams that Joseph had, where he saw his brothers bowing to him. And then the second dream in which he saw not only his brothers bowing to him, but also his mother and father. The Torah then tells us the brothers were very upset, but his father looked forward to it happening, to the dream being fulfilled. And there are many questions on the subject. Why were the brothers upset? Why was the father eager to have it happen? Why would he want to bow to his own son? What was that all about? Of course, the biggest question is, why did Joseph tell this dream to his brothers, knowing that it could upset them? So what is the story here? Now, to keep things in proper context, as we've spoken many times, all the children of Jacob, all the children of Yaakov, were absolutely holy, righteous people, totally incapable of sin. It was just not in their DNA. Certainly Joseph. Yosef was a tzaddik. In fact, that's his title. The patriarchs are called patriarchs, our fathers. Matriarchs are called matriarchs, our mothers. Joseph is called Yosef HaTzadik. In that context, knowing that we're talking about completely holy, godly people, we need to understand the stories, and where it appears or it seems like they did something wrong, we're not understanding it, and we need commentary. The difference between Joseph and his brothers is that the brothers were shepherds. Not because they needed the sheep. They were shepherds even spiritually. They lived a step above and beyond the physical. They were removed from the world. It didn't interest them. They didn't engage in it. They stayed away from the madding crowds. They stayed away from big cities. They were out in the fields, communing with God constantly. Joseph, on the other hand, said that in order to serve God properly, you need to engage in the world. You need to affect the world, not from a distance, from up close. And so we see that Joseph's destiny was to be taken to Egypt against his will, to be a servant in the house of Potiphar, where Potiphar was the boss, not Joseph. Then he was in a dungeon, again against his will, and even when he became the viceroy of Egypt, it was under the rulership of Pharaoh. So he was very much engaged or entangled in worldly things, and yet, even as he went about all of these experiences, he remained completely unaffected, and his connection to God was not compromised at all. The brothers felt that that is an improper way of serving God, that it is dangerous, that it wouldn't work. It would only corrupt those who try. Now, everybody knew that the ultimate purpose of creation is to bring God down to earth. Not just Joseph. Everybody knew that. And everybody worked at doing that. Only the brothers and the patriarchs before Yaakov, Avraham, and Yitzchak, they did it in a spiritual fashion. They brought God down to earth in the spirituality of the earth, not the earthiness of the earth. So yes, they taught people to believe in God. But belief is not earthy. Belief means to see the spiritual side of the world. Belief is mostly in your soul, not in your mind, because the mind needs to understand, not believe. So in their own way, they were bringing God down to earth. But it seems they felt that it was not yet time to actually engage the earth itself. Of course, that would eventually happen. It has to happen because that's the whole purpose of creation. That God permeate every activity, every aspect of the human character, that we see godliness, we understand godliness, we feel godliness, we enjoy godliness. It has to permeate everywhere in order for the world to become holy, in order for God to be fully present in the lowest part of the lowest world. That certainly was the goal all along. But the brothers felt that it was not yet time, and that Joseph was getting ahead of himself. And because it wasn't yet time, it wouldn't work. It would be a disaster. And they felt this very strongly. Joseph's dreams, on the other hand, suggested the opposite, that they would all bow to him, meaning they would all agree with his way of serving God. So they were upset about it because he was pushing the envelope. But Yaakov actually anticipated and looked forward to the fulfillment of those dreams when everybody will see and agree with Joseph's way of serving God to actually engage in the world and bring godliness there as well. How is it possible for godliness to really permeate the physical world? Physical and spiritual are opposites. Holy and unholy are not compatible. You can't bring holiness into a place of unholiness. You're not allowed. It's blasphemy. It's sacrilege. So how is this going to happen, and why should it happen to lower godliness down to a place of ugliness? What is the virtue in that? Obviously, when we bring godliness into the lowest of places, the place is transformed, stops being low or ungodly or ugly, and becomes holy. But then the question is, how exactly does that happen? How does holiness transform unholiness when they're so different? It would seem like if you bring holiness into a place of unholiness, you get some kind of a mishmash, some kind of a concoction that is neither holy nor unholy. It sounds like a mess. It's like spiritual people out to kill each other. The only way that you can have a true transformation of the unholy into holy is if you get beyond and above the conflict. What makes the holy holy? What makes the unholy unholy? Whatever those conditions are, whatever those values, virtues, or lack of, you got to get beyond all of it. Because where holiness and unholiness clash, there can be no transformation. Even if the unholy surrenders to the holy, it's only a surrender, it's not a transformation. And sooner or later, that obedience or subservience could change. And the evil suddenly can't tolerate the holy, and then you got your problems back again, which is a very common experience. A person is inspired, has some religious, spiritual experience, is all excited about being godly, until some temptation comes along and he realizes that he really hasn't changed much at all, and all of a sudden he's back to where he was before, and maybe even worse. Because now he thinks he experienced godliness and it didn't work for him. Why would he try again? So in order to really transform the physical, the material, and make it godly, you've got to reach to a higher place, higher than where the holy and the unholy are in conflict. In other words, something greater than holy, certainly greater than unholy. But no amount of holy will transform the unholy. So just getting more religious or more spiritual is not going to do it, because they're inherently incompatible. So more holiness is only going to overwhelm the unholy. It won't transform it. Maybe that's why no amount of love is going to make a bad person good. No amount of love can transform hate into love. It may take the edge off. If you love your enemy, he might not hate you as much, but it won't transform. What will? Something greater than love, which is not in conflict with hate. Love and hate are opposites. You can't resolve that. The only way is to go above the love and hate level of existence and bring in a much more powerful reality that neutralizes both the love and the hate. That can transform the hate into love. That can transform the unholy into holy. That can transform the ungodly into godly. What is this higher force? Sounds too mystical. The higher force is God created heaven and earth. Heaven means spiritual, earth means earthy. God created them both, and he created them as a counterbalance. For everything in holiness and spirituality, there's an equal and opposite thing in the unholy. There's love of goodness, there's love of sin. That's the creation. The creation consists of contrasts, heaven and earth. But what about the Creator? In the Creator, there are no such conflicts. In the Creator, there is no friction. Everything exists in the Creator in total peace. Because they're all just part of the Creator. They don't compete with each other. They're all there to express God's desire, including the evil. The evil exists because it serves God's purpose. Now, once it's created, they each follow their own nature. The nature of the spiritual is very different than the nature of the physical. But if you go higher, earlier, back up, where is all this coming from? It's all coming from God Himself. And in God, there is no conflict. The good will help the world become godly. The bad will help the world become godly. No conflict at all. Because the ungodly doesn't exist for its own purpose. It exists with its own nature, with its own rules, but not for its own purpose. Just as the godly exists, not for its own purpose. Now, this is really a fundamental, indispensable part of Torah thinking. You're not supposed to do a mitzvah for the sake of the reward. What does that mean? Which reward? Well, obviously, for a mitzvah, you get a spiritual reward. And you're not supposed to do it for a spiritual reward. In other words, you're not supposed to do a mitzvah, not supposed to do something holy in order to have the holiness. That's the payoff. You're not supposed to do it for that. You're supposed to do the mitzvah because it pleases God. Meaning, it serves God's purpose. Is God's purpose for you to be holier? No, it's something much bigger. Ultimately, God's purpose is that you should become like Him, not just holy. That you should desire what He desires, not do it for Him. So here's the point of it. Even when you're doing the most holy thing in the world, it's not for its own sake. So we say evil exists only to be transformed into something holy, to give us a contrast so that we appreciate the holy. It doesn't exist just to be evil. That we understand. But then we think that the good exists just to be good. No. Everything in creation, including heaven, exists to become something higher. It does not exist for itself. And that's why we don't do mitzvahs for the holiness of the mitzvah. Even the mitzvah serves a higher purpose. And that is, we're serving Him. And in Him there is no conflict at all. Both the mitzvah and the sin serve the same purpose, only in opposite ways. So one of the ways we understand what the Talmud says, that in this week's portion where it says Yaakov sat or dwelled in the land of his ancestors, say he had just gone through the horrors of the conflict with his brother Esav. He had gone through the horrors of his family, his wife's family, the house of Lavan. And now, finally, he wished for a peaceful existence. He wanted to settle. And then all of a sudden, this whole problem with Joseph comes up. His brothers sell him into slavery, tell the father that he was killed. And he goes through another trauma, another painful chapter in his life. It makes it sound, if you read it in its simple meaning, it makes it sound like Yaakov desired a little peaceful, calm existence after all that trouble, and he was wrong, and as a punishment for that, the problem with Joseph came about. No, you can't have a peaceful existence. Now you're going to have to suffer with Joseph's being sold away into slavery. But it can't mean that. What Yaakov was saying, he wished to settle and have a comfortable, tranquil existence. What is that tranquil existence? The kind of life that we're going to have after Mashiach comes. Until then, of course, there can be no real tranquility because the world needs so much work. And we have to do the work. So certainly Yaakov did not want to retire from the job of making the world godly and just relax and have a tranquil existence. What it means is something like this. Yaakov wanted the tranquility of Mashiach, and every wish that a tzaddik has is fulfilled. How did it get to be fulfilled? By the problem of Yosef. Yosef was sold into slavery. He ended up in Egypt. The entire family went down to Egypt and turned Egypt into a holy place. That's how you bring Mashiach. So when it says that Yaakov anticipated and looked forward to the fulfillment of Joseph's dreams, it means not that Joseph would rule over his father and his father would bow to him. It means that the godliness that comes as a result of working with the world, bringing godliness into the world, that's how you bring Mashiach. When did this happen in a large measure? In Yaakov's lifetime? After he came down to Egypt and was reunited with Joseph. And then he had Vayechi, he lived for 17 years in tranquility. Because he had fulfilled his measure or his quota of the process that brings Mashiach. Through Yosef, who was his extension, his representative, his disciple, not only his son. Through Yosef, Yaakov actualized his ability to make the world holier within the world in Egypt, not in the Holy Land being a shepherd. So now the whole thing makes a lot more sense. And the moral of the story is, we have been in exile for almost 2,000 years, not in vain. The idea was to bring godliness to every kind of ungodliness. One of the ways of doing that is by extracting the sparks of holiness that exist in unholiness. For example, intellectual superiority, intellectual fascination. Jews lived in the land of Bavel, which at that time was the center of intellectual activity. The libraries and so on, the great Renaissance of the time. Only it was all secular knowledge. Jews lived there, took that fascination with understanding, knowledge, books, and study, and used it for holiness. In today's world, we live in a country where thinking parochial is unacceptable. Thinking only of your own city is unacceptable. Thinking only of your own country is unacceptable. We think big. In fact, we live in a time when thinking only about Earth is unacceptable. We feel a need to get to the moon, to get to Mars. This is quite a contrast to a generation or two ago when Jews were living in ghettos, in shtetls, without ever really knowing what goes on beyond those walls. There's a reason for it. We have to take this global thinking, this cosmic thinking, which could create terrible results if there isn't some holiness to it. You take this attribute and turn it into holiness. Global holiness, cosmic holiness, international holiness. Bring godliness to every state, to every country, to every location. Because it's universal. It's bigger than right and wrong. It's bigger than holy and unholy. It's God's pleasure, God's desire, God's purpose in creation. And then everything fits. Because there's no place he is not. There is nothing that doesn't exist to serve his purpose. We just have to make it clear. We just have to show the way. And then we can have tranquility, real tranquility, where there is no longer any conflict between up and down, right and wrong, right and left. It's all godliness. That's Mashiach. We have a Sunday night program for VIPs that you might be interested in. It's informal, it's questions and answers, it's conversation. It's really relaxed, it's really pleasant, enjoyable, informative, and kind of community-like. It's a Sunday night program, there's a Wednesday morning program for the VIPs, and there's a Wednesday night program. All of it just conversation, casual, laid back, unscripted. So join us, take a look. Click the link below and see which of the three suits you best, and join us for some enjoyable conversation.